My name is Juanita McMahon, and I am narrating Missing Pieces.
My name is Laura Pearson, and I'm the author of Missing Pieces.
And I'm delighted to be able to share this recording time with you, to ask you some questions. It's a fascinating, wonderful book. I feel very honoured to be narrating.
Thank you.
Missing Pieces, I believe, is your first book. So the question is, have you always wanted to write?
Yes, I've wanted to be an author since I was about 6. I think my parents still have a story I wrote about a witch. I did some pictures and I told them I wanted to be an author, and then I've really stuck rigidly to that through my whole life. So I spent maybe 10 years as a copywriter and editor. So I've always been writing in some way, but I always wanted to be an author. And so it's a dream come true, really, to finally get there.
And which authors inspired you when you were growing up?
As a child, I really liked Roald Dahl. I also quite liked a lot of Enid Blyton. And then when I was about 13, I grew up in a house with a lot of books. And when I was about 13, I picked up a copy of Jane Eyre and I read it. And my dad walked into the room and just sort of said, "Oh, I wondered when you were going to start reading proper books." And because I'd always been such a huge reader, but I hadn't made that switch. I'd been reading kind of teenage books. And I wasn't a huge fan of Jane Eyre, and then had a bit of a crisis because I thought maybe I don't like literature, and I'd always thought I did. And then I read The Catcher in the Rye and loved it, and realised that I just prefer more contemporary. I mean, that's not contemporary, but more recent. So I'm not an enormous fan of classics, but I felt like I was back on track once I found things that were considered proper adult books that I really liked. And then there was kind of no stopping me. It was just, I was just a voracious reader from then, reading everything I could get my hands on, really.
What inspired the story and the characters of Missing Pieces?
Esme's character came first. She was originally part of a completely different novel that I wrote when I was doing an MA in creative writing. For the dissertation, I was writing a novel with a character with this character, Esme, in it. But it wasn't about... Esme did have a sister that she'd lost in childhood, but the novel wasn't really about that. And I put it to one side, that novel, because I couldn't work out... I knew it wasn't working and I couldn't work out why. And I wrote another novel. And then I came back to it, and I think the letters to Phoebe came. And then I realised that was what the book was about, the loss and the impact of that loss on the family over such a long period. And so I had Esme and I had the letters. And then I think B was the final piece that came. And then it felt like, this is working now.
I find it fascinating, the shift in the time and the perspectives from the characters, I have to say, reading. But
yeah, it's a big jump, isn't it? A lot of people have told me they're quite shocked when they get to that bit and realise they're suddenly jumping 25 years.
Yeah, which is, how long did it take you to write the book?
It's kind of hard to answer that because I was writing it in different guises for such a long time, so it feels like it's taken forever. But by the time I kind of landed on this as a final plot, I think probably a year or 18 months. But there've been various rounds of edits and a lot of false starts with it. So it's been in my life a really long time.
This is a question I'm always dying to ask is, do you have a writing process? And I mean by that, do you get up, have a coffee? Is there a sort of ritual to your writing?
No, not really. Because when I was working full time, writing always had to be kind of squeezed into evenings and weekends, so it was quite haphazard. And then I had my children, and so now writing has to be fitted in around them. And my eldest child has just gone to school, so I'm tied to the school run.
You're allowed to say that.
And that short day, which feels long when you're at school, but when you're a mum, feels like about 10 minutes. So no, I'm terrible. I'm all over the place. I don't have a desk. I write at the dining table or just in an armchair. I just carry my laptop around the house and just write.
Some of the scenes in Missing Pieces are incredibly emotionally raw, and there are even times I think reading it quite unbearable. Were you in tears when you were writing?
I have been in tears writing, and definitely reading back. I think sometimes you write a scene and you're only kind of emotionally engaged with it when you read it back. And I always think that's quite a good sign if it makes me cry, when I know what's coming and what to expect. And when readers tell me it's made them cry, even though it sounds awful, but I'm always really pleased because it is a really sad book, and if it's made somebody cry, then they've connected with it. But I wrote the book. People are often surprised that I wrote the book before I had my children, and I'm not sure I could have written it after having my children. And I have friends who've told me they can't read it, friends who have children or who've lost children, and I completely understand that. My husband read it when I first wrote it, and then he read it again just recently, and he said it was a much harder read now that we have 2 children, and you understand exactly what those stakes are.
The nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's almost the unimaginable, really.
Yeah, and just the everyday of it. They're just an everyday family, and there's just this perfect storm of events that mean that something unthinkable happens in their house, but it's not, it's not that somebody comes and takes their child, or it's the fact that it feels like it could happen to you, could happen to anybody.
Absolutely. Do you listen to audiobooks?
I listen to audiobooks all the time. I have done for probably 5 years or so, and I feel like they changed my life because I read a huge amount anyway, but I now read probably twice as much because I have an audiobook and a physical book on the go always. And if I'm cooking or sorting out washing or walking back from school drop off carrying a scooter, I'm always listening. Or driving, anytime. So I just get through a lot more books, and it's just a different experience of reading as well. I think you experience a book in a completely different way.
What type of books or audiobooks do you like? I mean, do you have favourite authors or genres? Or
I read a lot of women's fiction, and I read quite a lot of crime, psychological suspense, that type of thing. Audiobook, I quite like listening to memoirs, non-fiction. And my favourite audiobooks this year have been Station 11 and All the Ugly and Beautiful Things. I've loved both of those. But yeah, I read quite a wide range, but always almost always set kind of in the 50s or more recently than that. I don't really read very much historical fiction.
what does it feel like to hear your words being read out loud, obviously for this audiobook?
It feels like it's a different book in a way. I sat up there and put the headphones on, and I thought I'd sit there for a couple of minutes, but I couldn't stop listening because it's just so interesting, somebody else's take on your words. It's like just in the same way that a reader brings something to each book, a narrator brings a huge amount to it as well, and so it just feels like a huge privilege to see an interpretation of it that's different from my own.
It was interesting because I didn't know you were that you were there, and then when I realised you were in the studio, there was a part of me going, "Oh!" But it is an honour.
Really don't need to feel like that.
It is an honour, really, to be reading. It's a very beautiful book. Lots of people who listen to audiobooks access them through their library. Are you a library visitor?
Yeah, I'm a huge library user. I was as a child, because I think I got through so many books that it would have been ridiculous to buy all of them. And now I lived in London for a long time, and then I moved to Leicestershire 3 years ago. And I go to the library a lot with my children. We go to rhyme time, nursery rhyme sessions. And I don't borrow books because I buy a ridiculous number of books, but more than I could ever read in my life. But I use the library for my children a lot, and we borrow audiobooks for them. But maybe I should stop buying and start using.
Is your house full of books?
Well, I stopped buying physical books and started reading mostly on my Kindle. And so it's like a secret. Nobody knows how many hundreds of books there are on my Kindle because they don't take up any physical space. But more recently, I run an online book club that has over 3,000 members. And so publishers often send me proofs now. So now it's starting to fill up with actual books again.
We are really excited to read your next book. So are you working on something at the moment?
I am. My publishers are publishing 2 more books, both of which are already written and that we're editing. So the one that's coming next is the first full novel I wrote before I wrote Missing Pieces. And I don't want to say the title because I don't know yet whether it might change. We're in quite early stages. But it's about sisters again, and it's about infidelity, and it's about falling in love with possibly the right person, but at completely the wrong time.
It sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.